So we're talking about some of the environmental conditions under which microorganisms can grow. And I ask you to kind of pay attention to looking at the variety of environments that you can find microorganisms or find prokaryotic organisms compared to like where humans grow or where animals can live. We talked about different temperature ranges, and there's different organisms that can live in extremely cold, extremely hot environments. You know, we as humans have to maintain that 37 degrees Celsius. We can live in a cold place, but our body, our cells still need to be 37 degrees Celsius. All sorts of different microorganisms can survive in different oxygen containing environments. Humans are just aerobic, but we've got microorganisms that can live without oxygen. We have some that can fluctuate between using oxygen and not using oxygen. So there's a lot of variety there. And a third area, environmental condition, where you're going to find a variety of microorganisms is when you look at different pH ranges. Recall that the pH scale measures how acidic or how alkaline something is, and 7 is neutral. Above 7 is basic. It goes up to 14, but this scale is just showing you to 12. So pH scale goes up to 14. Above 7, you're more alkaline, and below 7, you're more acidic. So the human body, our body fluids, our blood is at pH 7.35 to 7.45. So we're talking about this kind of range around here for human pH. And notice that there's a lot of microorganisms. I mean, microorganisms can grow in this neutral area. In fact, any organisms that we're going to find living in and on the human body, most of them, not all of them, but most of them are going to be able to grow in these neutral pHs. Disease-causing organisms are going to grow in these neutral pHs. One area that I can think of an exception is that we do have microorganisms that grow in a woman's vagina, and the vaginal, and these microorganisms create a somewhat acidic environment. So there's some microorganisms that grow at these little bit lower pHs, and because they create an acidic environment, they discourage the growth of these neutral loving bacteria, neutral pH loving bacteria. So we have a relatively narrow range of microorganisms that can live in a woman's vagina because it's a slightly lower pH than the rest of the body. So those organisms that grow in an acidic environment are called acidophiles. And we have a lot of acidophiles, exposure to acidophiles in our daily life. Not only do some live in a woman's vagina, but we have acidophiles. These are lactic acid bacteria. In fact, these are very similar bacteria to those that live in a woman's vagina. They're also lactic acid bacteria. And it says they ferment milk and they make yogurt. So when these bacteria grow, they produce an acid product, and it causes the milk to curdle. And that's what makes yogurt firm. That's what turns milk into solid yogurt, the bacteria creating acids. And so these are bacteria that are acid loving. When you have yogurt in your refrigerator, I always have plain yogurt in my refrigerator. It can last pretty long. It can last, I don't know how long it lasts, but I definitely keep it for a couple weeks sometimes. And I don't worry very much about it spoiling because all these lactic acid bacteria growing in here are creating an acidic environment, and they're discouraging the growth of these neutral loving bacteria. And a lot of these, it's mostly these neutrophiles, or these neutral loving bacteria, neutral pH loving bacteria, that would cause disease and spoil our food. So yogurt lasts pretty long, especially like plain yogurt. I don't know, once you start adding sugar to it and all that, if you can make it not last as long. I'm not sure, but definitely plain yogurt with lots of healthy lactic acid bacteria in it is a great way to preserve the food. Here we do a lot of fermentations, like making sauerkraut and pickles. This one is oh gosh, what is that called? Ceviche, where you take fish and scallops and things like that, and you put citrus on it. And what it does is it discourages the growth of our most common bacteria that are going to make us sick, these neutral loving bacteria. So all these are making acidic products to discourage the growth of most bacteria, but there are some bacteria that can grow in these acidic environments. And so those are the ones you're using to make the pickles, to make the sauerkraut. And these don't typically cause disease. So fermenting foods has long been a way to discourage the growth of disease-causing bacteria or food-spoiling bacteria, and allowing these acidophiles to create these interesting flavors that we like. We tend to like acidic flavors. We don't tend to like alkaline flavors. And so there are some bacteria that can grow in alkaline environments, but we don't tend to put them in foods because we don't like how they taste. They taste bitter. So I have on here common bacteria, including most of our normal microbiota and pathogens, usually grow between pH 6.5 and 7.5. So in this range right here. Notably, molds and yeasts, the fungi, typically grow between pH 5 and 6. They're going to grow at a little bit lower pH. So sometimes you'll have an environment where yeast might grow, but bacteria don't grow very well. And again, going back to a woman's vagina, if they have a lot of lactic acid bacteria, the pH of a woman's vagina is going to be more like down here. So even mold, even yeast won't grow. But sometimes there's a disruption in the normal microbiota, and the lactic acid bacteria aren't growing very well, and other bacteria start to grow, and the pH starts inching up, and guess what? That's when you get a yeast infection. So sometimes we disrupt the normal microbiota that are acidophiles in a woman's vagina. It will cause the pH to increase, and you can get the growth of yeast. And if you get the pH goes up enough, you can get the growth of bacteria. So women can get vaginal yeast infections, vaginal bacterial infections. And I just put on there, acidophiles are the acid-loving bacteria that you'll find in a woman's vagina. You'll find them in yogurt. You'll find them in fermented foods. Okay. Another topic, so another variation, an environmental factor that's going to influence the growth of microorganisms, is salt concentration. And this is why one of the reasons we talked about osmosis. It's going to come up again this semester, but this is one of the reasons we talked about osmosis. It says explain the different salt concentrations in which microorganisms can grow. A halophile is a salt-loving microorganism. A salt-loving microorganism. And so an obligate halophile, these are organisms that have to grow in high salt environments. Obligate halophile, organisms that have to grow in high salt environments. Now, we talked about with osmosis that high salt solution is hypertonic to cells. But these are cells that evolved in very salty environments. So halophiles are only found in, or obligate halophiles are only found in unique environments. And this is a picture I found, somebody vacationing in the Dead Sea in the Middle East. So here's the Dead Sea is 30% salt. And that's 8.6 times saltier than the ocean. So it's got a lot of salt. Almost a third of this is salt. And the reason why you see vacation pictures like this of people at the Dead Sea is because the salt makes makes the water denser. So people float really easily, and you can even just kind of float around and read a magazine when you go on vacation to the Dead Sea. But the reason why it was called the Dead Sea is because people said, oh, it's so salty. There's nothing should be able to live in there, until people started looking for microorganisms, and they found these obligate halophiles, which turned out to be some of those weird bacteria, some of those weird prokaryotes, the archaea. So there's obligate halophiles in the Dead Sea. They can't survive in an environment where there's not high salt. So they've evolved to tolerate these really salty environments. I also like this picture because you can see where there might be facultative halophiles. If a halophile is a salt-loving organism, a facultative halophile means it can grow in high salt, but it doesn't have to. Remember, we had that word facultative anaerobe. It can grow in high salt, but it doesn't have to. And an excellent example of a facultative halophile are these organisms that live on our skin, particularly Staphylococcus epidermidis, common bacteria on everyone's skin. And so it turns out Staphylococcus epidermidis can grow in isotonic environments. It can grow in the same environment that E. coli can or any of our any normal microbiota. But they can also grow up to like 7% salt. This is really salty, but they can't grow in the Dead Sea. But they can grow on your skin and where it's kind of drier and saltier. It's more hypertonic. So they can grow in places like our skin. E. coli, when it gets on your skin, let's say you changed a baby's diaper, you got some poop on you, and you didn't even notice. The E. coli can be on your skin and survive there for a little bit, but it's eventually going to die. It's not able to survive the dry, salty environment of your skin, but Staph epidermidis can. So it's a facultative halophile. I like this picture. This is a picture, an aerial photograph of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. And there's actually this, I think it's like a road that you can drive across right here or some kind of, it's not a bridge or a dam or something, but there's something that separates these two. Might be like a dam, but it separates these two halves of the lake. And this side of the lake is much saltier than this side. And it turns out that there's these certain kinds of prokaryotic algae or microalgae, and also it says an archaeon. These are archaea. These are these weird bacteria called halobacterium that are growing in this really salty environment, and they just happen to be purple. They have some photosynthetic pigments, and they have kind of unusual metabolisms. But you can tell they're growing here because you can see that that purple. So a lot of these halophiles have kind of unusual metabolisms. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about in this chapter are biofilms. And